The screaming was the first sign. Not a human sound, but the tortured shriek of metal tearing itself apart. The transport pod bucked like a wild animal, alarms blaring a frantic, useless chorus. Valerius fought the controls, his expression less like a man facing death and more like one dealing with a profoundly disappointing piece of machinery. Come on, you glorified tin can, work with me. The diagnostics were a cascade of red. Hull integrity critical. No kidding. Atmospheric friction. Yup, feeling that. Through the viewport, the planet was a furious ocean of red crystal sand rushing up to swallow him. He abandoned the dead controls and eyed a heavy, manual lever. Well, plan B it is. With a grunt, he threw his weight against it. A deafening crack, a violent tumble, a bone-jarring slam, and then silence. He hung in the darkness for a moment before unbuckling and kicking the shattered hatch open. He stumbled out into the alien glare of a crimson sun, dusting himself off. "Note to self," he said to the empty desert. "Next time, book a flight with better landing gear and maybe a complimentary beverage. The view is consistently red." That's when he noticed he wasn't alone. 3 figures in pristine, pearlescent white armor stood on a nearby dune. They approached with an unnerving, synchronized grace. The one in the lead, his helmet marked with a blue stripe, stopped a few feet away. His filtered voice was cold and sterile. "Cadet Commander Orion, Vraxis 9th Legion. By the parameters of the Crucible Initiative, this territory is now a designated survival trial zone. You are an unsanctioned variable." Valerius raised an eyebrow. "Variable? Honey, based on the looks of my ship, I think main event is more accurate. So this whole survival trial thing, is there a prize at the end or just the lingering trauma and a desperate need for therapy?" Beside Orion, the mountain of a being named Vex took a step forward. "It talks back," he growled, his voice a low rumble. He looked Valerius up and down. "It's soft. I could snap it in 2. "Whoa there, big fella," Valerius shot back, a grin playing on his lips. "Is that the best you've got? Soft? I've seen scarier-looking furniture. At least try to be creative with your insults. It makes the crushing despair of being stranded slightly more entertaining." The third alien, Jex, had been scanning the wreckage with a device on his wrist. "Fascinating," he chirped, ignoring the banter. He gestured at Valerius's pod. "The energy source is a primitive chemical reaction. The hull is a simple carbon-iron alloy. It's like a museum piece." Valerius patted the broken hull affectionately. "A museum piece that just took a nosedive through your atmosphere and didn't spill my imaginary coffee. We call that reliable. Might be a new concept for you guys, I get it. You should write that down." Orion held up a hand, silencing his team. He seemed to be processing Valerius's unexpected attitude. "Your survival of the impact is in itself a statistical anomaly," he stated, as if reading from a textbook. "I'm full of anomalies, pal. You'll get used to it. Or you won't. Either way, I'm going to need some coffee. And I don't see a galactic Starbucks around here, so you guys are my only hope for entertainment." As if on cue, the wind picked up, carrying sharp particles of red crystal. The sky was darkening. "A Class 4 atmospheric disturbance is approaching," Orion announced, his confidence returning. "Deploy the multiphasic energy shield."
A shimmering dome of blue energy hummed to life around them. Try to find shelter, human. Your primitive biology is ill-suited for this. You don't say, Valerius said dryly. He glanced at their high-tech soap bubble and then at the wreckage around him. All right, you guys have fun in there. Me, I'm more of a solid chunk of metal between me and the pointy things kind of guy. Call me old-fashioned. As Vex laughed, Valerius got to work. He found a long strut, and using it as a lever, began to maneuver a huge curved piece of the hull. Yeah, that's it, he grunted to himself. Use your brain, not a battery you forgot to charge. He finally wedged the plate between two rock outcroppings, creating a solid, reliable barrier. The storm hit like a physical blow. The wind howled, and the crystal sand became a blinding blizzard. Inside their dome, the cadets looked on with smug assurance. But then their shield began to flicker. "Commander, the particulates are causing power fluctuations," Jex yelled. "Reinforce the frequency," Arion commanded. Valerius, leaning comfortably against his solid wall of metal, shouted over the wind. "Hey, is there a setting for sandstorm on that thing, or was that an optional extra you didn't pay for?" The shield flickered violently, turned a sickly yellow, and then, with a pathetic pop, it vanished. The aliens' smug expressions turned to ones of pure panic as the full force of the storm slammed into them. Valerius just shook his head, pulled his jacket a little tighter, and settled in. It was going to be a long night for them. For him, it was just another Tuesday.
The silence that followed the storm was a physical weight. As the twin moons began their descent, casting long skeletal shadows, the first hint of dawn painted the eastern horizon in a bruised shade of purple. The world felt scoured clean. The crystal desert now a landscape of smooth, rolling dunes that glittered like shattered rubies under the emerging light. A metallic scrape broke the stillness. Valerius pushed aside the heavy hull plate he had used as a door. The air was thin, cold, and carried the clean scent of ozone left by the storm's fury. He stretched, joints popping in protest, and surveyed his handiwork. The rock alcove was dry, his small pile of gear untouched, solid, reliable. Then he looked over at the Roxist cadets, and a slow grin spread across his face. They were a portrait of misery. They stood in the middle of a charred, pathetic circle on the sand where their energy shield had died. Vex, the mountain of muscle, paced in tight, angry circles, kicking at the sand as if it were a personal enemy. Jex, the tech prodigy, sat hunched over his dead tablet, his fingers still tapping at the dark, unresponsive screen with a desperate, futile rhythm. And Arion stood like a statue carved from pride and denial. His immaculate armor was now scuffed and dull, his posture rigid, but Valerius saw what the others might have missed, the almost imperceptible tremor in the commander's gauntleted hands. Valerius sauntered over, his boots making a faint, crunching sound that seemed deafening in the silence. "Morning, campers," he said, his voice cheerful. "Sleep well? Or was the high-tech, open-air experience a little drafty for you?" Vex stopped pacing and spun to face him, his face a mask of fury. "Silence, human!" Valerius just held up his hands in mock surrender. "Whoa there, big guy. Just making conversation. Team morale and all that." He reached into his jacket, pulled out the nutrient paste bar, and broke off a piece. He held it out. Breakfast? It was an act of pure, calculated audacity,
an offering of pity disguised as generosity. Vex looked at the offered paste as if it were poison. "We don't need your scraps." Arion stepped forward, placing a restraining hand on Vex's shoulder. He addressed Valerius, his voice tight and controlled. "Your gesture is noted and unnecessary. We have our own standard issue rations." Valerius glanced pointedly at their gear, half-buried and clearly non-functional. "Right," he said, popping the piece of paste into his own mouth. "Those, the ones that need a working power source to be edible. I see." He chewed thoughtfully. "Suit yourself. More for me." He started to turn away, then paused, as if a thought just occurred to him. "Just thought I'd offer. You know, since your automated snack dispensers seems to be on the fritz." He gestured around at the ruined landscape, along with everything else. The jab landed with surgical precision. Vex bristled with rage, but Arion's grip tightened, holding him back. Arion himself said nothing, his jaw clenched tight beneath his helmet. But Valerius noticed Jex wasn't looking at Arion or Vex. He was looking at the ration bar in Valerius's hand, and then at Valerius himself. And in the young alien's eyes, for the first time, there wasn't contempt or pity. There was a question, a dangerous, critical question that was just beginning to form.
By midday, the sun was no longer a star. It was a hammer. It beat down on the red desert, and the desert hammered the heat right back. The air shimmered, turning the horizon into a wavering, drunken line. For the Vraxis cadets, thirst had become the new enemy, more present and terrifying than any storm. Their advanced suits could regulate temperature, but they couldn't create water. Valerius, however, was busy. He ignored the oppressive heat. His focus narrowed to a patch of strange, hardy plants with thick, waxy leaves. Where there were plants, there was moisture. He began to dig a shallow pit in the sand a few feet away, the dry crystals resisting with a soft grating sound. Vex watched from the sliver of shade provided by a rock outcropping, his voice dripping with scorn. "Look at him now, Commander. He's digging his own grave. Has the heat finally broken his tiny mind?" Arion didn't answer immediately. He was watching Valerius's methodical movements. "Standard procedure dictates we conserve energy and await rescue," he finally said, more to himself than to Vex. "This is an unsanctioned expenditure of calories." Valerius heard them, and a grin touched his lips. "Hey, I can't speak for you guys, but I get cranky when I'm dehydrated," he called out, not bothering to look up. He lined the bottom of the pit with the leaves he'd gathered, then salvaged a thin, clear polymer sheet from his pod's wreckage. "Besides, I'm starting a little business venture. Valerius's artisanal, sun-brewed desert water. Catchy, right?" He placed a cup-shaped rock in the pit's center and stretched the polymer over the top, securing it with stones. With a final flourish, he placed a small pebble in the middle of the sheet, creating a dip right above the cup. "And what is that pathetic contraption supposed to be?" Vex sneered. Valerius stood up, wiping sweat from his brow. "Hey, it's a little something I like to call physics, my large, angry friend. A concept I'm sure is covered in one of your dusty old data scrolls." He gestured grandly. "Sun heats the ground and the leaves. The water in them turns to vapor. Vapor rises, hits the cooler surface of the plastic, and here's the magic part. It turns back into liquid. Gravity does the rest." He shrugged. "It's not a starship engine, I know. Bit low-tech for your refined tastes, but hey, a man's got a drink." He then sat down and waited. The sun, his unwilling employee, got to work. The hours crawled by. The alien's silence grew more desperate.
Then Jex, whose eyes had been glued to the contraption, shot upright. "Commander, look!" A single, perfect bead of moisture had formed on the underside of the polymer. It clung there, a tiny, glittering defiance against the oppressive heat. As they watched, it grew, slid down the slight incline, and trembled at the lowest point. For a breathtaking second, it held, a perfect jewel of life. Then it fell with a faint, musical plimp into the cup below. It was followed by another, and another. Jex scrambled over, pushing past a stunned Vex. He peered at the slow, miraculous process. When Valerius deemed enough had been collected, he carefully lifted the sheet. The rock cup held a small, precious amount of crystal-clear liquid. He swirled it, then held it out, not to Warion, the leader, or Vex, the strongest, but to Jex, the curious one. Jex took the cup as if it were a holy relic. His scanner activated automatically, analyzing the contents. "Purity, 100%, he whispered, his voice cracking with disbelief. "It's perfect." He looked at Valerius, his scientific mind reeling. It wasn't magic. It was a simple, elegant application of universal law that he had overlooked in favor of a button he could no longer press. He took a sip. The cool, clean water was the most profound thing he had ever tasted. It was the taste of ingenuity, the taste of survival.
As the desert's heat bled away into the cold of night, the twin moons rose, casting eerie, elongated shadows. The cadets, huddled together, were momentarily soothed by the small victory of having water. It was a calm that did not last. It began not as a sound, but as a feeling, a low, rhythmic tremor in the ground, felt only through the soles of one's boots. Valerius, who was scanning the horizon, went utterly still. He tilted his head, listening to the sand itself. "Everybody," he said, his voice dropping from its usual sarcastic drawl to a sharp, focused whisper. "Freeze and shut up now." "What is it?" Arion started to ask, his hand instinctively going to his sidearm. "I said, shut up," Valerius hissed. Then they saw it. Flowing over the crest of a nearby dune like a creature of liquid night, a shape emerged. It was large and sleek, its obsidian skin seeming to drink the moonlight. It moved with a terrifying fluid grace on 6 powerful legs. Its head was a smooth, armored plate, completely devoid of eyes. An echo stalker. Arion's training kicked in, overriding common sense. "Defensive pattern Delta!" he commanded, his voice a sharp bark in the stillness. It was the worst possible thing he could have done. The creature's eyeless face snapped instantly towards the sound. Vex, seeing a tangible enemy at last, roared a challenge. "Finally, a real fight!" He charged forward, his combat knife buzzing to life. Valerius wanted to scream at the sheer idiocy, but he clamped his jaw shut. "Don't make a sound." The stalker didn't even bother to dodge. As Vex closed in, it moved with a speed that defied its size. A whip-like tail lashed out, not with the intent to kill, but to swat. It caught Vex mid-torso, sending him tumbling through the air like a discarded toy. He crashed in a heap 20 feet away, the air knocked from his lungs. It wasn't a fight. It was a dismissal. The creature now took a step toward Arion and Jex, honing in on their ragged, panicked breathing. While the Vraxis cadets saw a monster, Valerius saw a system, a simple one. Input, sound. Output, violence. He remained motionless, his eyes scanning not the creature, but the terrain around it. His gaze landed on a dark, shimmering patch of sand 50 feet to the creature's left, the crystal quicksand he had noted earlier. A plan, insane and elegant, clicked into place in his mind. "Jex, Arion," he whispered, his voice barely a breath of air. "Don't move. Don't even breathe loud." He then raised his voice slightly, just enough to carry to the groaning heap that was Vex. "Big guy, play dead. It's the one thing you're good for right now." Slowly,
Deliberately, Valerius bent his knees, his eyes never leaving the stalker. He picked up 2 heavy, palm-sized rocks. He weighed them in his hands. He took a breath. He threw the first stone, not at the creature, but about 20 feet to its right. It landed with a sharp clack. The stalker's head whipped toward the sound, its body tensing. It was listening, analyzing. Valerius threw the second rock, putting all his strength into it. It sailed in a high arc and landed with a much louder thwack right in the middle of the crystal quicksand patch. The effect was instantaneous. The stalker abandoned the cadets completely. It exploded into motion, a black blur charging towards the source of the new, more interesting sound. Its powerful legs ate up the distance in seconds. It hit the dark patch of sand at full speed, and its charge became a floundering struggle. The crystal quicksand grabbed its legs, pulling it down. The creature let out a high-pitched shriek, a blast of sonar and pure frustration, as it thrashed violently. But its every movement only served to drag it deeper. Its terrifying shrieks became choked, gurgling sounds as the red sand filled its vocal sacs. Then, with a final convulsive shudder, it was gone. Silence, absolute and profound, returned to the desert. Vex pushed himself to his knees, staring in disbelief. Arion let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding for a full minute. Arion slowly, mechanically lowered the useless weapon he'd been aiming. He looked at the spot where the monster had vanished. Then he turned his gaze to Valerius, who was calmly dusting the sand off his hands. Arion's face was pale under the moonlight. It was the face of a man whose entire universe of training, protocol, and belief had just been proven utterly wrong by a soft human with a couple of rocks.
The silence left behind by the Echo Stalker was absolute. For a long moment, no one moved. The only evidence that the creature had ever existed was the disturbed patch of sand, which was already beginning to settle back into a deceptively smooth surface. The twin moons shone down on 4 figures, their realities permanently altered. Vex was the first to move. He pushed himself to his feet, wincing as his bruised ribs protested. He didn't look at his commander or his teammate. He walked stiffly over to Valerius, stopping a few feet away. The massive, humbled warrior simply looked at the human who had saved them, with nothing but observation and a few rocks. He gave a short, sharp nod, a gesture of respect more profound than any words he could have offered. That single nod seemed to break the spell. Arion finally took a step forward, the sound of his boot on the crystal sand unnaturally loud. His face was a mask of cold, hard clarity. The denial was gone, replaced by the bitter taste of truth. "Valerius," he said. The name was no longer an identifier for a specimen. It was a title. "My assessment was flawed." He paused, the words costing him a great deal of his pride. "Standard Vraxis protocols have proven insufficient." He looked at the spot where the stalker had vanished, then back at Valerius. The massive, humbled warrior simply looked at the human who had saved them with nothing but observation and a few rocks. He gave a short, sharp nod, a gesture of respect more profound than any words he could have offered. That single nod seemed to break the spell. Arion finally took a step forward, the sound of his boot on the crystal sand unnaturally loud. His face was a mask of cold, hard clarity. The denial was gone, replaced by the bitter taste of truth. "Valerius," he said. The name was no longer an identifier for a specimen. It was a title. "My assessment was flawed." He paused, the words costing him a great deal of his pride.
Standard Vraxis protocols have proven insufficient. He looked at the spot where the stalker had vanished, then back at Valerius. What is our next move? He stood at attention, a commander awaiting his orders. What is our next move? Valerius met his gaze. There was no "I told you so" in his eyes, only a pragmatic intensity. "There's no protocol for this, Arion," he replied, his voice calm and even. "Protocols are what got your shield turned into a light show and your heavy hitter thrown across the desert. From now on, there's only the problem and the tools we have to solve it." He turned and looked up at the vast, star-dusted sky. "And the problem is this: we're invisible. If a rescue ship passes, they'll do a standard orbital scan for an active transponder, find nothing, and mark us down as acceptable losses. We can't whisper for help. We need to shout." "A signal fire?" Jax asked, his voice eager. He had moved to stand closer to Valerius, looking at him like a student ready for a lecture. "A fire is a candle in a hurricane," Valerius countered. He raised a hand and pointed toward the horizon, where the colossal crimson spires clawed at the sky. "We need something louder. We need to put on a show so bright, so impossible, that some bored technician on a rescue freighter looks at his screen and says, 'What in the hell is that?' We need to be a statistical anomaly they can't ignore." A new energy seemed to flow through the exhausted group, the energy of a clear, albeit insane, objective. "A light-based signal?" Jax asked, his mind already racing, the scientist in him reawakened. "The energy requirements would be astronomical. What could possibly serve as a power source?" Vex, having retrieved his knife, stepped forward. "Just tell me what needs to be hit or moved," he rumbled, his voice low but steady. Arion looked at his two cadets, then back at Valerius. The rigid commander was gone, replaced by a focused officer ready to execute a new kind of mission. "Give us the objective, Valerius," he said, his voice firm. "We will carry it out." For the first time, they were not 3 Vraxis cadets and a human variable. They were a team, and their impossible mission stood before them, glowing faintly under the light of the twin moons.
They stood at the base of the largest crystal spire, a monolithic shard of crimson that seemed to hold up the night sky. It pulsed with a faint internal energy, a captured heartbeat of solar power. "All right, here's the theory," Valerius began, his voice businesslike, the architect laying out his impossible blueprint. "This thing is a giant, naturally occurring capacitor. It spends centuries soaking up solar radiation. It's unstable. My guess is that a significant kinetic impact, delivered at the correct resonant frequency, won't just chip it, it'll force a catastrophic energy discharge." Jex's eyes widened, his mind instantly grasping the physics. "A forced resonance cascade," he breathed. "The energy release would be astronomical, but the calculations would have to be perfect." "That's where you come in," Valerius said, pointing at the young alien. "I need numbers. I need the exact frequency of this crystal, and I need you to pinpoint the sweet spot, the structural node where an impact will cause the most stress. I need a target." He then turned to Vex. "Big guy, we're going to need to move a mountain, or at least a very large rock. That's you." Finally, he looked at Arion. "Commander, I can design this contraption, but you know how to make a team move with purpose.
You direct the labor, you keep us efficient. We don't have time for mistakes." For the first time since they met, Arion gave a sharp, confident nod of understanding, not to a set of rules, but to a plan. Understood. The next few hours were a blur of calculated, desperate effort. The desert, which had been their enemy, now became their workshop. Jex, with his salvaged diagnostic tool, scanned the massive crystal, his fingers flying across the cracked screen. "The primary harmonic is at 93.4 hertz, he'd shout. "The weakest structural point is there, 17 meters up, at a 33.7-degree angle." Under Arion's crisp commands, they worked as one. They hauled jagged pieces of the escape pod's wreckage, fashioning a crude but sturdy ramp. Vex, his immense strength, now a valued asset, did the work of 3 men, moving a massive, pointed boulder into position to act as a pendulum. His grunts of exertion were the sounds of focused purpose, not frustration. Valerius was the overseer, the master craftsman, making minute adjustments to the lever and rope release system he'd designed. "A little more to the left, Arion. We need the impact to be dead on." "You heard him. Let's move, let's move." Finally, it was done. The massive boulder hung poised at the top of the ramp, held by a single straining lever. The 4 of them stood back, exhausted, covered in red dust, looking at their primitive, magnificent machine. "Ready?" Valerius asked, his hand on the release lever. Jex watched his scanner, his breath held. Vex stood by, his muscles coiled. Arion gave a single, sharp nod of understanding. Valerius threw his full weight on the lever. The mechanism groaned, the ropes snapped taut, and the boulder was released. It slid down the ramp, gaining terrifying speed, before swinging out in a perfect, silent arc. It struck the crystal spire at the exact point Jex had marked. The impact was a dull, resonant thud, a sound that seemed to be instantly swallowed by the crystal's mass. For one agonizing heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a low hum began, vibrating through the sand, through their bones. The faint glow inside the crystal spire began to brighten, from red to an orange, then to an incandescent, blinding white. A web of pure energy, like lightning trapped in glass, erupted across its surface. It didn't explode. It bloomed. With no sound at all, the spire unleashed a century of stolen sunlight. A silent, impossible pillar of pure crimson energy erupted from the crystal and shot straight into the heavens. A solid beam of light so intense it bleached the twin moons from the sky. It was a wound in the darkness, a scream made of light, a beacon of defiance that tore through the void. On the ground, 4 small figures could only shield their eyes and stare up in awe at the beautiful, terrible thing they had made.
The rescue ship arrived in less than an hour, descending from the heavens not like a savior, but like a predator. It was a military vessel, sleek and gray, its engines barely whispering as it settled onto the sand with an intimidating precision that made Valerius's crash look like a child's tantrum. The main ramp lowered with a hydraulic hiss, revealing a figure silhouetted against the ship's sterile interior light. A senior commander, flanked by 2 armed guards, strode down onto the sand. His uniform was a masterpiece of sharp angles in spotless fabric, his face carved from granite, his eyes missing nothing. He surveyed the scene with a sweeping, analytical gaze, the battered cadets,
the scavenged wreckage that had been turned into tools, and the colossal crystal spire that still pulsed with a soft, residual crimson light, like the embers of a dying star. His expression did not change. He walked directly to Arion, his polished boots stopping inches from Arion's dusty ones. His voice was a low baritone that didn't need volume to command absolute authority. "Cadet Commander Arion," he began, the words clipped and cold. "Your team is off mission and out of protocol. Your advanced equipment is slag. Your survival contradicts all preliminary projections." He paused, letting the weight of his disapproval settle. "Explain to me the single most critical piece of equipment that ensured your survival." The question hung in the cold desert air, a final test. Ariel stood taller, his back ramrod straight. The old Arion would have launched into a detailed report, quoting regulations and blaming unforeseen variables. But that Arion was gone, burned away by the storm and humbled by the silence. He did not look at his superior. Instead, he turned his head and looked directly at Valerius, who stood quietly by the wreckage, arms crossed, watching the proceedings with a detached, almost amused expression. Their eyes met for a brief, significant moment. Arion then turned back to face the senior commander. His voice was clear, steady, and devoid of any excuse. "An engineer's mind, sir." The senior commander's gaze, sharp as a laser, followed Arion's, shifting to the human. He studied Valerius for a long, silent moment, taking in the worn-out civilian clothes, the confident, relaxed posture, the intelligent eyes that held no fear, only curiosity. He saw the man who survived the crash, tamed the storm, outsmarted the monster, and lit up the sky. The stern mask of the commander did not fall, but something behind his eyes shifted. The look of cold judgment was replaced by something else entirely, a deep, calculating, and undeniable respect. The trial was over. A new standard had just been set.